This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We spend the hour today with one of the country's leading writers and thinkers on food and food policy, Michael Pollan. He's written several best-selling books about food, including The Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food and Eater's Manifesto. He's just written a new book called Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. In the book, Michael Pollan argues taking back control of cooking may be the single most important step anyone can take to help make our food system healthier and more sustainable. Michael Pollan's the Knight Professor of Science and Environmental Journalism at the University of California, Berkeley School of Journalism. He joined me in New York when his book was released just a week ago. I started by asking him about the journey he took in writing Cooked.
It was probably the most fun I've ever had as a writer, and it's hard to describe it as work exactly. When I figured out what I wanted to do, which was kind of drive cooking back to its most elemental reality, I decided to apprentice myself to a series of masters. And I divided it into four central transformations kind of the common denominator of all cooking. Fire, cooking with fire, the oldest. Water, which is to say cooking in pots, which comes much later in his history and involves a whole different set of ways of transferring heat. Air for baking, and earth for fermentation. And so in each case, I found somebody or a couple somebodies who were really good at the mastery of that element. And I worked for them, a number of shifts, a number of events, or lessons, and just kind of acquired these skills that I had never had before.
So tell us about your trip to North Carolina to the barbecue maker.
Well, I wanted to start with fire because fire is where cooking starts. Probably 2 million years ago, according to the current thinking, which is before, of course, we were Homo sapiens. We were still Homo erectus at that point. And when we acquired the control of fire and the ability to cook meat, especially over fire, but other things as well, we unlocked this treasure trove of calories, of energy that other animals didn't have. Because when you cook food, you basically pre-digest it outside of the body, so you don't have to use as much energy. Your body doesn't have to use as much energy to break it down. You don't have to chew it as much. And it's a huge boon, and it probably led to the larger brain that we have compared to other apes our size, and the smaller gut, although we seem intent on enlarging that gut right now. But so I figured what was the cooking most like that? And it was whole hog barbecue as practiced in eastern North Carolina. Barbecue is very balkanized, and every region in the South has very different rules on what constitutes barbecue and an abhorrence of all other forms of barbecue, which they won't even call barbecue. So I went to North Carolina, to eastern North Carolina, and I worked with a man named Ed Mitchell, who is a pretty well-known pitmaster, African-American, who's been at it for many, many years after being a Vietnam vet and working as a Ford in the Ford dealership network. And we did a couple barbecues where we cooked these whole pigs over wood and very slowly, and then we had these amazing public events where you have to take an entire pig and chop it up, mix it with various spices and vinegar, and turn it into sandwiches. It's actually a remarkably simple kind of cooking. It's like pig, heat, wood, time. That's the whole recipe. But you need a whole pig, and you have to be able to move it around, which is a little tricky. What I liked about Ed is, unlike almost every other pitmaster I could find, he cared about the pigs and where they came from. Barbecue is an incredibly democratic food. It's cheaper than McDonald's in many places, and far more delicious. On the other hand, the only reason it can be that cheap is they use commodity hogs, the worst of the worst, which is, it's an industry kind of ruining North Carolina. Ed Mitchell is a little different in that he really cares where the hogs come from. And in fact, he's paid a price for that with the industry.
In what way?
Well, when he started kind of evangelizing about using small farmers, hogs raised outdoors, all of a sudden he had tax audits and prosecutions for various business practices. And, no one's been able to prove the quid pro quo, but the timing is awfully suspicious. And he lost one of his restaurants because of this initiative against him.
And explain what his concern was about commodity hogs.
Hogs today are raised indoors in brutal conditions in these confinement, CAFOs, confinement operations. The sows live in little cages, too narrow for them ever to turn around in their entire lives, because they don't want them to crush their babies, and it just makes it easier to inseminate them, which they do over and over and over again. And these pigs, go crazy gradually. I mean, I've written about this before, and that's one of the reasons I had trouble celebrating barbecue that wasn't, in some sense, humane or sustainable. And Ed has figured out how to do it. And, of course, he has to charge $9 or $10 for a sandwich. Other places charge $3. But on the other hand, it's a whole meal. So I don't begrudge him that price.
And explain how he does it.
Well, Ed does whole hog exclusively. He thinks the way they do it over in the western part of the state, where they just do pork shoulders, it's good, but it's not barbecue. And he does it in over wood and charcoal very slowly. So the key to making barbecue is getting the temperature consistent and low, like 200 degrees. None of us cook at 200 degrees. That's like a hot tub. I mean, it's a hot tub. But when you do that, the fat kind of slowly renders into the meat, and the meat gradually breaks down, and after 20 hours or so, you could pull the whole thing apart with a fork, and it's really delicious.
So you went from fire to
water. And, fire cooking is very male. It's very, there's a lot of self-dramatizing guys doing barbecue, as there still are in every backyard in America. And it's very ritualistic and very public and very communal. It has some wonderful and stupid, bombastic qualities. Cooking in pots is more domestic, traditionally more feminine, more modest. It happens under a lid. You can't see what's happening. You can't watch a pot boil because it won't boil. But it's a very important technology, and the second important cooking technology. It doesn't happen until about 10,000 years ago, because you need pottery that can hold water and survive heat to start cooking this way. But when you can cook with water, by boiling water, you can soften grains, for example. A revolution happens in human society because you can feed old people and very young people who don't have teeth. So the elderly live longer as soon as you can boil food, and you can wean babies earlier. So it's a wonderful method for that. And it also allows you to combine plants and meat, or just plants. It allows you to eat grain, which you can't really eat without water. And it really, was a revolutionary way of cooking. And I approached it as a lesson, a series of lessons in braising, stews, and soups. And I worked with this wonderful chef named Samin Nosrat, who is an Iranian-American, trained at Chez Panisse in Berkeley. And she would come to my house every, couple Sundays, and we'd make a big meal together, and my wife and son would get involved, and then we'd invite friends over, and I learned these wonderful lessons from her. And every time she'd have a theme, and today we're going to learn about emulsification. And
so what is emulsification?
Emulsification is basically combining fats and waters in a stable solution, like when you whip eggs, or a salad dressing is an emulsification, basically. And how do you get those particles to stay together? Or we do a lesson in the Maillard reaction, which is how, in the presence of heat, amino acids and sugars turn into these wonderful flavor compounds, thousands of them, that makes food much more flavorful, much more elusive. One of the interesting common denominators of all cooking is that you take these very straightforward, given, simple flavors, and you complicate them, and you make a food taste like other things. It might taste like, give it the aroma of flowers, or bacon, or it's sort of like poetic language. Basically, where you inflect everyday language into something more heightened and elusive to other things, more metaphorical, and you do that with cooking too. And so we worked on that, and these were the most practical skills I learned, the ones I use every day. I love making braises. It's incredibly simple, but time-consuming.
What do you mean by braises?
Well, a braise is basically a stew where you don't cover the meat or whatever the central character of your dish is with liquid. You basically make a mirepoix, which is just a dice of onions and carrots and celery. and you saute that for as long as you can bear. The longer, the better. And then you add the you brown your meat, say if you're doing chicken, and you put that in, and then you add a liquid. But you only have the liquid come up an inch or so, and it doesn't cover the meat. And what that does is, and then you cook it very slowly, again, like 225 degrees for as long as you can stand. 4 hours is better. Chicken, you can get away with 2 hours. And what happens is the part that isn't covered with liquid browns beautifully. Maillard reaction takes place, and then the bottom kind of stews, and the whole thing kind of gets soft, and the muscle fibers relax and become gelatinous and delicious. And so it's a really nice way to cook. It's a way to cook on a Sunday to have several meals during the week, because it's even better as leftovers than as the first time around. So in a way, it was the most sustainable kind of cooking I learned, in the sense of that I've been able to fold it into my life on a weekly basis.
Journalist Michael Pollan, his latest book is Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. We'll return to our interview in a minute.